Did you know that one Australian car kicked off the entire local automotive industry in 1948? Yet genuine survivors are so rarely seen in real life that many younger Australians don't realize its monumental historical significance. Another one absolutely dominated Australian motorsport throughout the 1970s, winning Bathurst repeatedly and building a legendary racing pedigree, but is now so completely overshadowed by modern V8 Supercars that it is often overlooked by anyone outside hardcore enthusiasts. But then there's the everyday hero, a car that was once on every single street corner, in every driveway, and serving every police fleet in the country, only to vanish so completely that seeing one today feels like spotting a ghost. These are the 15 most forgotten Australian cars ever made. We start with perhaps the greatest what-if in the history of Australian manufacturing, the Hartnett Pacific. This wasn't just a car, it was a weapon of revenge. It was the brainchild of Lawrence Hartnett, the man originally known as the father of the Holden. After leading GMH to success, Hartnett was essentially forced out by American executives who wanted to pull the strings from Detroit. But Hartnett didn't go quietly. He wanted to build a better, more efficient car for the Australian public to prove the Americans wrong. The Pacific featured independent suspension and modern European-inspired engineering for its time, utilizing lightweight construction that was innovative compared to the heavy steel of the era. However, the venture was plagued from the start by political and financial hurdles, supply chain issues, massive tooling costs, and alleged pressure from larger manufacturers on local suppliers meant the Pacific never reached full-scale production. Only a handful were ever completed before the company collapsed into a mess of lawsuits and debt. Today, the Hartnett Pacific is a ghost, a symbol of a brilliant vision that was crushed by industry politics before it could ever change the world. Decades before the first Holden ever turned a wheel, there was the Australian 6. Built in a factory in Ashfield, Sydney, right after the First World War, this was a fiercely patriotic attempt to establish a genuine local car industry. It proudly bore a badge shaped like the map of Australia and was marketed with the slogan, "Made in Australia by Australians for Australians." It was a high-quality touring car, blending locally sourced components with a robust American-designed engine. It was rugged enough to handle the unpaved, brutal outback tracks of the 1920s, but the economics simply didn't stack up. High local production costs meant the Australian 6 was significantly more expensive than the mass-produced Fords and Chevrolets being shipped in from overseas. By 1925, the venture was dead. Today, this car is virtually forgotten outside of specialist history circles, representing the very first heartbeat of Australian automotive ambition. The Leyland Force 7 is a car that technically shouldn't even exist. It was the planned coupe version of the infamous Leyland P76, a car that had its own share of disasters. While the sedan was meant for families, the Force 7 was the cool sibling. It featured a sleek, sporty fastback design and was one of the earliest large Australian cars to feature a rear hatchback design. Under the hood sat a massive 4.4-litre all-alloy V8, giving it the muscle to match its looks. But as Leyland Australia began to crumble under the weight of financial failure and poor build quality, the Force 7 was axed just as it was ready for the showroom. The company famously ordered the destruction of the prototypes to avoid paying taxes on them. However, in a legendary act of defiance, about 10 to 15 were secretly saved, smuggled out, or sold at a final auction. These few survivors represent a what could have been moment that still haunts Aussie car history. We're moving to a car that was a strange hybrid of British design and Australian assembly. A car that was supposed to be the future, but struggled to handle the reality of the Australian environment. These were locally assembled variants of British designs that tried to reinvent the family sedan. In the early 70s, while Ford and Holden were perfecting the heavy rear-wheel drive V8 formula, Leyland Australia decided to go another way with the Austin Kimberley and Tasman. These cars featured a transverse-mounted inline-six engine and front-wheel drive. Revolutionary for the time in a car this size. They offered incredible interior space and a smooth ride, but the execution was a nightmare. The complex engineering struggled with reliability and cooling in harsh Australian conditions, leading to chronic overheating and mechanical headaches. They were too sophisticated for their own good and arrived at a time when Aussie buyers just wanted something simple they could fix with a hammer. They lasted just 2 years in the market before being quietly put out of their misery. The Goggomobil Dart is perhaps the most famous forgotten car on this list, thanks to iconic TV commercials, but few realize it was actually a homegrown lightweight microcar experiment. While the mechanicals were German, the body was 100% Australian, designed and built by Bill Buckle in Sydney. The Dart featured a tiny, doorless fiberglass body that looked like a miniature spaceship. To get in, you didn't open a door, you simply stepped over the side. It was powered by a microscopic two-stroke engine that sounded like an angry lawnmower. While it was light and fuel efficient, it offered zero protection in an accident and sat extremely low compared to typical cars of the era. It was a quirky, adventurous experiment in an era of massive steel, chrome-plated cruisers. Today, it is a prized oddity, a tiny reminder of a time when Australian engineers were willing to try anything to solve the problem of urban mobility. A tiny fiberglass bubble was one thing, but wait until you see the mid-engined V8 Supercar built in a Queensland shed that was so fast it terrified the people who built it. The Giocattolo is the ultimate, if you know, Australian car. Only 15 were ever built in Caloundra, Queensland, and it remains one of the most insane performance machines ever produced on our shores. It started with an Alfa Romeo Sprint body shell, but the builders did something truly mad. They ripped out the back seats and stuffed a mid-mounted, highly modified Holden 5.0-liter V8 right behind the driver. This wasn't a kit car, it was a precision-engineered supercar with Kevlar panels, Brembo brakes, and a ZF transaxle. This car was insanely fast, hitting 100 kilometers per hour in around 5 seconds, staggering for the late 1980s. But the cost was astronomical, and the company couldn't survive the financial pressure. The few that exist are now multi-million-dollar pieces of history hidden in private collections. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, the Purvis Eureka was the car that looked like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie, based on a UK design but manufactured in Melbourne. The Eureka was a fiberglass sports car that abandoned traditional doors entirely. Instead, the entire roof and windshield, the canopy, lifted upward to let the driver in. Underneath the wild wedge-shaped body, it usually sat on a humble Volkswagen Beetle chassis. This meant that while it looked like it could outrun a fighter jet, it usually had about 50 horsepower and struggled to overtake a bus. Despite the lack of speed, the Eureka had a massive wow factor. It was the ultimate statement car for someone on a budget. Today, they are rare survivors of the kit car boom, often forgotten by the mainstream but still capable of breaking necks whenever they appear in public. A fiberglass wedge with no doors is weird, but we're moving into the territory of cars powered by high-performance Ford Zephyr engines and 1930s luxury ghosts. Bill Buckle makes his second appearance on this list with the Buckle Sports Coupe. Long before he was making the tiny Goggomobil Dart, he was building a serious, high-performance sports car to take on the world. Using the rugged mechanicals and engine from a Ford Zephyr, Buckle wrapped the components in a sleek, aerodynamic fiberglass body. Because it weighed significantly less than the steel Ford it was based on, the Buckle was a rocket ship for the 1950s. It performed strongly in local hill climbs and racing events, proving that an Australian-built car could hang with the best from Europe. Only about 20 were ever made, and most were driven to within an inch of their lives on the track. It remains a legendary but largely forgotten chapter of the 1950s racing scene. The Southern Cross is a car that feels like a legend from another life. Reportedly associated with Charles Kingsford Smith, the car was named after his record-breaking aircraft. It was intended to be a premium, rugged, high-quality vehicle that could survive the toughest conditions the Australian outback could throw at it. Built during the absolute depths of the Great Depression, the Southern Cross featured beautifully crafted Australian bodywork, but the economic timing was fatal. Only a handful were ever completed before the venture ran out of money. Today, it's a ghost car, surviving only in archives and the collections of veteran car clubs, a reminder of a time when even our greatest national icons couldn't make the math of car manufacturing work. We've seen aviation ghosts, but next is a car built by a company that made cement mixers, and it was so strange it required a different way of thinking just to go backward. This is widely considered as one of the weirdest cars ever built. Lightburn was an Adelaide company famous for making cement mixers and washing machines, and they decided they could apply that expertise to the automotive world. It featured a fiberglass body and a tiny two-stroke engine. It was crude, loud, and incredibly uncomfortable. But the most famous feature of early versions was that they required reversing the engine direction to move the car backward. It was a commercial disaster that became the butt of jokes for decades. Today, it's a cult icon, precisely because it was so strangely ambitious. The Chrysler by Chrysler was the ultimate expression of Australian luxury. This was a massive, vinyl-roofed land yacht, designed to go head-to-head with the Ford Fairlane and Holden Statesman. It was packed with every luxury imaginable for the time. Thick pile carpets, plush velour or leather seats, and a smooth V8 engine. But it arrived just as the world was waking up to the reality of the fuel crisis. While Ford and Holden had the market share to survive the dip, Chrysler did not. The Chrysler by Chrysler faded away, becoming a rare sight on the road and a forgotten titan of the 1970s. The Chrysler Valiant VC represents a pivotal moment in Australian car design. It was the model that moved Chrysler away from the boxy American look and toward a sharper, more uniquely Australian aesthetic. Crucially, it continued the use of Chrysler's legendary Slant 6 engine, an engine so durable it became known as the Tower of Power for its ability to run forever with minimal maintenance. Despite being a fantastic car, the VC was only in production for a single year before the VE replaced it. Today, seeing a clean VC is a rare treat. It is an overlooked bridge between early imports and the golden era of Australian-made Chryslers. The luxury titans and one-year wonders are one thing, but coming up are the three cars that actually defined the identity of Australia. The motorsport king, the original pioneer, and the car that was once on every single street in the nation. The Holden Torana isn't forgotten by car people. If anything, it's worshipped. But to the general public and younger generations, its legend is fading. Before the Commodore became the face of Holden, the Torana was the giant killer. Peter Brock's wins in the Torana are the stuff of legend, but as the decades pass, the Torana is often overlooked in favor of the more modern V8 Supercars. Clean, original examples are now incredibly rare and worth a fortune. For anyone under 30, the Torana is often just that car my dad talks about, but it was the vehicle that truly proved Australia could build a world-class performance car. The Holden 48 215. It is the car that started the entire industry. When it launched in 1948, it was a symbol of post-war hope and industrial pride, and proof that Australia could build its own cars from the ground up. It was a rugged, simple car designed specifically for the washboard dirt roads of rural Australia. Historically, almost every Australian knows the name Holden, but few have actually seen a FX in the metal. It has become a museum piece, a historical artifact that feels disconnected from the modern world. It kick-started a culture that lasted for 70 years and laid the foundation for everything that came after. The Holden Kingswood takes the #1 spot because it is the most significant car to have vanished from plain sight. For nearly 20 years, the Kingswood was the background noise of Australian life. It was the default choice for families, farmers, tradesmen, and the police. If you looked down any street in the 70s, you'd see them everywhere. It was a tough-as-nails, rear-wheel drive workhorse that could be fixed with a pair of pliers and some fencing wire, but because it was so common and so hard-working, most of them were simply used until they fell apart. They were crashed, rusted, or sent to the scrap heap when the modern Commodore arrived. Today, the Kingswood has been completely overshadowed by Commodore fame, turning what was once Australia's most common car into a rare sight. From the revolutionary Hartnett Pacific to the everyday legend of the Kingswood. These cars represent the high points, the weird experiments, and the crushing failures of an industry that no longer exists. Australian manufacturing might be gone, but these vehicles are the DNA of our car culture. They remind us of a time when we weren't just a market for global brands, but a nation that designed, engineered, and built its own future. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you've got a story about one of these forgotten legends, type it in the comments below. Thank you for watching and goodbye.